Oh, yeah.
Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to this session. My name is Jamila Conway Turner, and today we are going to be talking about tools that you can use to address student learning needs. I'm going to go over the agenda for today. First, we're going to have some welcome and introductions so you know who all of the presenters are going to be for this session. We're going to have an overview of the SWSS and charter system process and performance contract targets. We'll talk briefly about some national trends related to student learning after COVID-19. We will go over a toolkit for assessing learning changes after the spring of 2020 COVID-19 school closures. We will have some resources that we will point you to help you and your district and school teams, including the research synthesis and action planning template. And then we'll end with some next steps and we will wrap up. Again, my name is Jamila Conway Turner. I am a senior researcher here with REL Southeast. We also have with us today Alan Mueller. He is the Director of District Flexibility and Charter Schools Division at the Georgia Department of Education. Our two guest speakers today are going to be Dominique Bradley and Susan Burkhauser, both from REL Midwest, to talk us through the toolkit. And then before we get started, I really wanted to just give a little bit of background on regional educational laboratories. There are 10 RELs across the country that serve regions of the country. We are in Georgia in the Southeast region, and that is where we are coming from today. Here's just a little bit about the services that RELs provide. We do some applied research studies as well as provide some technical support. There are also workshops and coaching sessions to help schools and districts on topics related to education. And then we also have resources like Ask a RELs, which produce research reports for our education practitioners in the region. One really great thing about the RELs is that all of our resources are free and available for you all to use. And so just like this webinar, all of the resources are posted on the website and you have access to them so that you can use them and share them with your other school and district members. So now I'm going to invite Alan up to talk a little bit about SWSS and charter systems.
Thanks, Jamila. So in Georgia, the 180 school districts, which you see represented here on this map, 178 of them have performance contracts with the Georgia Department of Education. And those performance contracts confer flexibility to districts in return for specific program performance targets and the expectation of implementation of innovations that are outlined in the contract. So within those 178 contracted districts, there are two different types. So we have charter systems, and there are 48 charter systems currently in Georgia. And those systems, again, are under a performance contract. That contract allows those districts all the flexibility allowed by law. So that's why we call them charter systems. It's the same sort of arrangement that a charter school would normally have under a performance contract. So those contracts have very specific expectations in terms of performance from year to year and in terms of innovations that the district that's receiving flexibility will implement using the flexibility in the contract. So again, they have to really clarify how they plan to use that flexibility. But they also have the freedom to implement without asking for permission. That's the idea behind it. So the other 130 districts in Georgia that are neither charter systems nor have no contract are called strategic waiver systems. So strategic waiver systems also have performance contracts, but those performance contracts, rather than conferring the entire amount of flexibility allowed by law, they outline very specifically what the flexibilities are that are to be granted. So in other words, they go through by line, by state rule and by state law, and districts must request flexibility from specific laws and rules, and in return delineate how they're going to use those specific rules and laws, and specific performance targets are tied to each one of those rules and laws. So again, both kind of the same idea. Strategic waivers and charter systems both confer flexibility, both have higher expectations in terms of outcomes, but charter systems are set up so that all the flexibility is conferred to a system, and strategic waivers so that the flexibilities are delineated and performance targets are keyed to the specific flexibilities. The two systems that have neither one of those are called status quo systems, and those systems operate without any flexibility at all. So that's the outline of what those look like. We've had those in the Georgia Charter Systems Law it was passed in 2007. We've had some form of strategic waiver system since 2008, but it really was in 2015 that all districts were asked to either make a choice between one of the two or to remain status quo. In terms of what's next for the waiver program, I mean, we monitor this yearly, both for performance for charter systems and strategic waiver systems, but we don't just look at performance. We want to see what kinds of new innovations are being implemented. We want to see how well students are being supported by the innovations that have been implemented, and how well each system, under whatever kind of contract it's in, is able to really use the flexibility they've asked for to increase student outcomes. We're going to continue that in the future. It seems to be working well, and we're noticing from year to year that systems are doing a better and better job of using flexibility to increase outcomes. But what we're going to do next, we've been doing this all along, but we're going to continue to and really ramp up the search for best practices and to try to link the flexibility granted between higher and higher student outcomes. So in other words, where we see practices that really seem to be effective and really are using waivers to the best possible ability, we will capture those and share them throughout the state. That really is kind of our end in mind at this point. How the pandemic, the pandemic has affected services the way it's affected everything, but we've really found that systems have flourished having flexibility. Having flexibility, again, they have to follow many parts of the law, anything outside of education law, anything related to accountability, anything related to student health and safety, all those have to be followed. But otherwise, systems really have found that the flexibility granted under their contracts, whether they're charter systems or strategic waiver contracts, have helped them to shift and move and meet children where they are during the pandemic. So again, we've heard from across the state that systems have really been grateful for the flexibility. Really, our job in the department is to support them in this work and to make sure that that their questions are answered and they understand, they can get a view of how other folks are using the flexibility. I'm trying to think if there's anything else here. We did apply to the federal government we currently have a charter school program grant, and we were granted the ability to use part of that program grant to allow schools in Georgia, again, most of which have flexibility contracts, to implement distance learning, to counteract some of the effects of the pandemic. So that we've noticed that has tied together with the way folks use flexibility and the way folks are innovative, and that's been very helpful as well. So again, we plan as we come out of the pandemic, folks will return to quote unquote normal. Folks will continue to use their waivers. Folks will shift things back to have, to be more of a in-class environment, but we'll continue to do the work of charting how the waivers are used to increase student performance and look for better and better ways of serving students using flexibility.
That's great, Alan. Thank you so much for that explanation. I think that was really helpful. Okay, so before we move on to talk about the toolkit that will help address student learning changes, I just wanted to provide a little bit of grounding and show some two reports that have come out around national trends related to student learning. So there really haven't been too many reports that are showing what is happening with students learning when you compare pre-pandemic to post, I guess, during the pandemic times in the last year. But this recent report came out that compared students' test scores in fall of 2020 compared to fall of 2019. And they found a couple of things that I think are worth highlighting. And the first is that for reading scores, students' test scores were actually pretty similar in fall of 2019 and fall of 2020. And so that is encouraging in that area. But it does seem like math scores seem to be taking more of a hit. So when they looked at student test scores in math related to fall 2020, they were lower than the math scores of fall 2019. I do think it's important to note that students did show growth in both reading and math. So students are learning something. They have learned, being remotely, the hybrid systems that a lot of schools have had. They have learned in both reading and math and have had some growth, but the growth in math was typically lower than they saw for the growth in related to reading. This particular report did note that they had less data related to vulnerable students. And so they weren't able to really look at subgroups to see how subgroups of students compared in fall of 2019 to fall of 2020. So that's something to note for this particular report. The second report actually looked more at subgroups of students to see, whether or not they had similar scores in fall of 2019 compared to fall of 2020. And for this, they did show that students of color have lower scores if you compare those two different years compared to non-students of color. And also here you can see at the very top, you have reading averages and math averages. And this also aligns with the first previous report that showed that the reading scores are faring better than math scores, but that there are some student subgroups who are faring worse during the pandemic. And so now I'm going to invite Dom and Susan to come on to talk about this toolkit that they created.
Hey, thanks so much, Jamila. So we're really excited to be here today to give you just an overview of the toolkit, who it's appropriate for use, and how you go about using it. And I'll just note that the full toolkit, as well as a training webinar, is available on the REL Midwest website. Next slide. So this toolkit for assessing learning changes was developed in collaboration with the Ohio Department of Education in the fall of 2020, so shortly after the initial COVID-19 school closures. Before we move on, we just wanted to define some key terms that you'll find throughout the toolkit. So when we say pre-COVID-19, we're referring to the period before the public school building closures. Post-COVID-19, we know that we're still not post-COVID-19, but we're referring to the point after the initial school closures. When we say learning changes, we are talking about the difference between expected and actual scores on standardized assessments, where actual scores are meaningfully different. And then finally, remote learning refers to instruction taking place outside of the traditional school setting. So when the learner and educator is separated by time and/or distance. So the toolkit provides a step-by-step guide for districts to assess learning changes, to learn more about the experiences and needs of students, families, and staff, to understand how to use that knowledge generated from analyses to inform decision-making, and then finally to identify next steps in addressing student needs. The toolkit can be useful for both districts and practitioners. It can be used at the school or district level to assess learning changes quantitatively. It can also be used at the classroom level to qualitatively understand student needs and experiences. And finally, it can be used to overall develop a better understanding of what topic areas students most need learning supports in, for example, reading or language art or math, and which students are most in need of those learning supports. The toolkit offers guidance on conducting both quantitative and qualitative analyses. The quantitative analyses use existing student data to identify differential learning changes, allowing the user to tell who most needs additional learning supports and in what subject areas. The qualitative data collection and analysis helps the user to better understand the needs and experiences of students, families, and staff. So just to briefly give you an overview, we'll go a little bit more into depth with Susan later, but that's 5 modules, as you can see on the screen right now. So as you can see, each module represents a step in estimating learning changes, either quantitatively or qualitatively. So module 1, it's really about refining and finding those research questions. Module 2 is assessing your data. Module 3, conducting analysis and interpreting quantitative findings. Module 4 is about new data collection, mostly qualitative. And then module 5 can be used for planning. This toolkit comes with a series of appendices with workbooks, a decision tree, and also conversation guides that can be used to help guide you through the toolkit as you work your way through assessing learning loss. And we just wanted to share, this is also in the toolkit as well, but this just shows you the visual of how the different modules align with the different appendices, the workbooks, the worksheets, and those conversation key points. And now I'll turn it over to Susan.
Thank you, Dominique. And as Dominique mentioned, I'll now talk about how to use the toolkit. So the toolkit contains 5 modules, each designed to walk users through a set of steps needed for analysis, data collection, and planning for next steps. And as Dominique mentioned, it also includes workbooks, conversation guides, and decision trees to help users through the process of assessing learning changes using quantitative and/or qualitative approaches. Modules 1 through 3 are designed for use by districts with the appropriate research questions, data, and capacity to conduct a quantitative analysis of COVID-19 learning changes, and each module walks districts through crucial decision points prior to conducting a quantitative analysis. And the toolkit guides the user in the types of research questions the analyses can address, including how has student learning changed post-COVID-19, do student learning changes vary by student, school, or classroom characteristics? It also provides examples of how to craft questions that are specific and measurable. So for example, a district might ask, are post-COVID-19 learning changes in reading proficiency different for English learner students compared with other students in my district? The toolkit provides users with important considerations for these analyses. So these analyses cannot isolate the impact of school closures or the quality of remote learning after closures. They cannot isolate other conflating circumstances, so trauma, poverty, racial bias, job loss from school closure, or the details of the remote learning experiences. And then also collecting data consistently and continuing to conduct analyses will reveal the trajectory of loss and any mitigation across time. So for example, you may observe that the size of learning changes are different now at the end of the 2021 school year than they were at the beginning of this school year. The toolkit modules 1 through 3 specifically contain the following. Module 1 helps the user to identify and refine important questions about learning changes. Module 2 helps the user to identify and assess the use of existing student data. And then module 3 walks the user through conducting different types of quantitative analyses. And we've provided an example at the right of what a finished product of this kind of analysis might look like. Module 4 outlines considerations for new data collection activities. So these could include surveys, interviews, and focus groups. It can be used as an independent module or as a complement for districts that have completed modules 1 through 3. Module 4 focuses on qualitative analyses, and these types of analyses can add context to quantitative analyses of COVID-19 related learning changes. So for example, a district may want to know why certain groups of students experience larger or smaller learning changes in reading than the average student. They can also help to provide needed information to districts not available in administrative data. So for example, a district may want to know more about how students experienced remote instruction in reading in spring 2020. And in addition, these analyses can provide a fundamental understanding of the needs of districts, students, family, and staff going into the 2021-22 school year. So for example, how many families are experiencing housing or food insecurities? The toolkit provides guidance for conducting surveys. So it includes when these methods are useful for data collection. That is, when you already have an idea of what you might find in relation to your research question and need to do a check of your assumptions. And it also includes additional questions that may be answered when you're conducting surveys. So an example of this is, do students and parents feel that their remote learning experience was adequate? And the toolkit provides guidance for conducting interviews and focus groups. So again, it includes when these methods are useful for data collection. So that is when information is lacking about the topic of interest or a greater depth of understanding is necessary to address your research question. And then again, it also includes additional questions that can be answered when conducting interviews and focus groups. So an example here is, what kinds of professional development and support do teachers need to feel proficient in remote learning? Module 5 is intended to be used by all districts as a last step in their investigation into COVID-19 learning changes. This module's contents aids the user in creating a plan for disseminating findings, identifying new or additional questions about learning changes, seeking additional resources, and developing a plan for addressing student needs. So that's the toolkit. We did want to direct you to some additional resources that will be made available to you from the Institute of Education Sciences and resources from the REL Midwest. And as a reminder, you can also find this free toolkit as well as a recorded training webinar that's 3 hours in length and provides detailed instructions on how to use the toolkit. And that's available on the REL Midwest website. And I'll now turn it back over to Jamila.
Thanks so much, Dom and Susan. So in addition to the toolkit, REL Southeast developed a couple of additional resources that can help you and your school and district teams in planning related to opening in fall of 2021. So we developed a research synthesis as well as an action planning template. So I'm going to pull both of those up and just walk you through what these two resources are. So this first is a research synthesis that provides an overview of the research in these 4 different areas. So we have academic interventions, data and technology, non-academic interventions, and special populations. And so the research synthesis is broken up into those 4 different areas. And if you scroll down, you'll see that the academic interventions are listed here, as well as some references for particular resources that you can use related to academic interventions, a summary of the content, the findings, and some considerations for SWSS and charter systems as well. And so this is here to help you identify some evidence-based practices related to these 4 different areas as you are looking to help plan for the fall. And then we've also developed this action planning template, which you can use in conjunction with the toolkit as well as any other planning that you're doing. And it provides you these different areas to really walk through with your school and district teams what the needs are and what your particular goals are. You can talk through what success would look like and how you would know whether or not the particular evidence-based practice that you're using is working, different data that you have access to, And then also this table down here at the bottom, which you can use to identify the strategies that you're going to be using. You can talk through what the current practices are and any changes to those practices, in addition to different ways that you can monitor whether or not that practice is actually working. And so both of these resources will be posted on the REL Southeast website along with the recording of this webinar. And so that you'll be able to have access to them to be able to help plan with your school and district teams. I'm going to invite Helen on. She was a part of the team that developed the research synthesis to talk just a little bit about what the development of that and how that went.
Hi, thank you, Jamila. So as we considered articles for the research synthesis, we wanted to make sure that they were grounded in research. So everything listed is evidence-based, and it's also a more recent research article that's been frequently cited, and it includes practices or strategies that align with the waivers. So we believe that this resource will be able to assist districts to plan resource allocation strategies with the goal of improving student performance.
Thanks for that background, Helen. So hopefully these two resources will be helpful to you as you are doing some planning for the fall. And this is just a discussion question for you to have with you and your school district teams to think about how you can use these resources to help you. So we have the toolkit that we've presented, as well as the research synthesis and the action planning template. So for wrapping up, I just want to, remind you about the resources that we just discussed. This webinar is a part of a 3 series that we will be doing. And the next one is going to be around collective trauma and supporting the well-being of students and school staff. So please look out for the links to that webinar. They will also be posted on the REL Southeast website, as well as the websites for Georgia Department of Education. Here are all of the presenters that you saw today and our contact information. Please reach out to us if you have any questions about any of the content that we talked about today, or please reach out to me if you have any questions about REL Southeast. And that's it. So thank you so much for watching this webinar.